thing I don't think anyone really ever talks about actually practicing, probably because not that many people actually do it, but I think there's value in this as a technique. So people talk about double tracking or quad tracking rhythm guitars, so if you're into sort of heavy music, whether it's rock, metal, these sorts of things, the idea of kind of double tracking guitar parts is pretty common. You'd have a rhythm track on the left, hard pan left and hard pan right, and depending on the part you might also, you know, double up on the left side, double up on the right hand side, and because you have differences in the takes you end up getting sort of like a thicker wall of sound type of thing. Now, Randy Rhoads, I think, is one of the examples of a guitarist who used to double up takes of a guitar solo or even triple take a guitar solo, and you can probably hear in the intro there that what it does tonally is quite an interesting thing. I thought Eddie Van Halen was a guy who used to do this, but it turns out he just used the Eventide harmonizer and he had the dry signal on the left or right and the affected signal on the other side, and so you get like a false sense of double tracking, but the issue with that sort of stuff is when you collapse that to mono it can do different things phasing wise. Now, there's a few reasons that I think you might want to try learning to do this sort of thing. Now, the first thing to say is obviously you have to know the solo and be playing it pretty much the same every single time. So this is why I don't do this very often at all, because I improvise all my solos. So I had to sit down, and this was a solo that I played about 4 or 5 years ago, and I thought, oh, I'll just check this out because there was a little line in it. I thought I'd like to try that again. With a few elements to it, things that had slipped out of my playing, things that I don't do anymore, and I thought I'll try and learn that. So once you've learned your solo, the way that I practice this sort of thing is I play it back to back over and over and over again to get the thing under my fingers. I guess that's probably the way that you learn things as well. So you start off with bar 1, do bar 2, and you keep going back and playing it until you can eventually get all the way through the thing. And then sort of I just play the whole thing, and that was how I recorded that. I had 4 takes in a row and just chop them back over each other. So the reasons to try and be able to do this, I think first of all, for certain things it might sound pretty cool. So for vocally, sometimes vocalists will double track a chorus. The idea is that it has more energy potentially than a single track. Now, a single track will sound more intimate, so depending on what you're going for. So if you wanted like a really soft part at the start of a solo, definitely you don't want to double track that. But if you wanted a massive soaring part, then maybe, you know, towards an end of a solo you might want to double track a passage, and then that could give like a bit more of an energy, a bit more of a spread to the sound. That's something to consider. It's a cool thing to be able to do as well. Now, for me, the reason I think this is useful is because sometimes you'll be asked to play the same thing again, and if you can't do that because you've just improvised the whole solo, it's a little bit tricky, and I think some people don't necessarily fully grasp what it means to be improvising. So, you know, if a cameraman, for instance, you're working with, this happened to me on a shoot for Yamaha, and I was asked sort of a day or 2 beforehand, could you do something with a looper? And the nature of live looping is that it's going to be basically different every time, and so then when I'm having to think about, right, I want the tempo to be roughly similar, and these are the chords that I'm going to play, and then I'm going to play this layer over it, and then I've got this little lead line, is too much information to be able to remember. And so when it came, it was a single camera shoot for whatever reason, and then they said, can you play that again? And the answer is no, basically. So being able to do the same thing again and again is useful when it comes to filming something. I think Steve Vai is a guy who's very good at this. Well, who's going on over here? So there's an idea for you. So if you ever have to use a thing where you're playing the thing live and then at some point they're gonna film it again, to be able to play the same thing repeatedly is useful. Audio wise, I guess it wouldn't have to match up super well like this, but I like the idea that you're actually able to play that same thing again and again. And similarly, when I was recording at Real World Studios for Mark Kelly from Meridian, I think there was an expectation that I would be able to sort of replicate the solo so that during the multicam element of it, you have multiple takes with one camera, that things would line up. hoping that by the time I put this video together properly, someone will have come up with some other guitarists who do this as a technique. So I asked if you knew any guys that did this kind of double tracking thing, and a few suggestions came back, so thank you for that. John Frusciante apparently double tracked some solos on Stadium Arcadium. I think Dan Huff was one of the guys that used to do a lot of this. Steve Lukather apparently used to do a lot of this. Mike Landau used to do a lot of this. A really interesting one that came up, and you can find articles on this and stuff. Jaco Pastorius actually double tracked the entire bass part of Continuum, which John Mayer would later go on to cover, wouldn't he? Continuum. Anyway, no, but there's interviews and he's playing that on a fretless bass, I think, so that's really interesting. But he said, you know, he learned the whole piece back to back, there's no improvisation on it, and then just played it again, 2 takes. So I think it's a fairly interesting idea. Who else? There were some other people. John Five, so Marilyn Manson's guitarist. And then the most obvious one, I think the person that I've heard about this most often, Randy Rhoads. And then actually here's an example which I think is probably a very early example of this sort of thing. So Jeff Beck's Hi-Ho Silver Lining, you can hear that there's fairly clearly 2 takes. They're not actually super close. There's 2 takes of the lead break in that. And I think that has to be one of the earlier examples. Maybe the Beatles did this sort of thing a bit when they were experimenting with George Martin. I think certainly the idea of, you know, double tracking, triple tracking, whatever melodies, I think people will do. So whether it's Aaron from Intervals, there's people that do that sort of thing if you're playing instrumental guitar music. The whole solo, maybe not so much. The idea, maybe as practicing, you can really spot, you know, is this together or is there a bit here where I'm sort of rushing ahead way more than others. It's quite a revealing way to, you know, see if things line up, and you quickly can tell which bits of the solo that you're not really so sure of. The first time I remember doing this, I was recording a solo at university, and it was a solo that I had planned and that I knew, and so I tracked it 7 times with 7 different guitars, and it had quite a cool sound. And I've always sort of remembered from then that it's a thing that I've not really heard too many people talk about. I think Paul Gilbert has done that for a solo as well. But let me know in the comments if you've got other ideas for people that have done this sort of thing, and let me know if this is something that you practice. I think certainly most people will have checked out the idea of double tracking rhythm guitars. Again, the whole solo part I've not seen too much of. I just wondered if anyone else had done this. Feel free to like and subscribe if this was a tool your bag, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Using a preset for this, for the Helix. Let me know if you want me to drop it into the folder, and I will do so. Let's do a little video on that for you. Hopefully that wasn't a total waste of your time, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Have a good Sunday.